hour, so rack 'em up. Ooh, mama, it's cocktail hour, so pour it up. Pour it up.
What's up, guys? It's your girl Zeta Lisa, and welcome to Mama's Cocktail Hour. Today's gonna be a dope episode. We are going to be reading the book Bling by Erica Kennedy. We are currently on chapter 3, so today we're going to be reading chapters 3 through 6. So make sure to get your cocktail, get your water, get your tea, get your coffee, get your wine, whatever your poison is. And let's get to reading this book. The reason why this book is so, I think, it plays a key role in the Diddy case is because allegedly Erica Kennedy was close to Kimora, was close to Kim Porter, and she was a real big media girl, and they are alleging that this book may be about Diddy. The main character, Lamont, does remind me a lot of Diddy. But someone did mention something in the comments, and they said it could be Russell Simmons. So let's get to it and let's continue reading. We are on chapter 3. Chapter 3 is called Can Knock the Hustle. For 10 minutes, Daryl had been standing in front of the glass tower in Midtown that housed the triple large offices with his arm outstretched as available cabs whizzed by. He rushed out without his coat, and it was too cold to be out there in just a sweatshirt. The cold was one thing he hated about moving up here from South Carolina. It took damn near till June for the weather to break. Cabs never stopped for him. He knew he should have gotten himself some more time. And he would have if Lamont's cornball assistant hadn't made him wait while she put together some package for him to take to Lamont. He needs to see it tonight, Daryl, she insisted, then called the messenger service girlfriend, "'cause I gots to go." So now he was going to be late, and Lamont wouldn't stand for that. He thought about throwing up the hood of his sweatshirt to cover his cornrows, but that might just make him seem more menacing. He was damned if he did. He was damned if he didn't. Story of his life. A cab slowed to a stop in front of the building, and Daryl saw the blonde woman passenger handing money to the driver. Daryl crowded the door and tried unsuccessfully to open it. He wasn't going to accept that off-duty shit that these towel cabbies always tried to pull. He glanced up the street for a split second, thinking he saw a cute new TLE intern heading up the block. And when he turned back around, the cab was taking off, knocking him off his balance and nearly running over his foot. The taxi stopped at the next corner to let the blonde woman out. She walked back towards the building, conspicuously avoiding Daryl's glare. To add insult to injury, Daryl looked down and noticed a smudge on one of his brand new white-on-whites. Oh, hell no! He bent down to inspect the damage to his Nike and decided not to mess with it, risking it may make it worse. He rose and saw that a white man had hopped into the cab. This was the shit that Lamont needed to see. This is why he had to order cars on the company account. Lamont was always complaining about that, calling it a blatant abuse of company policy. "It's necessary, yo," had been Daryl's response. When Lamont pointed out that no one else in the office ordered town cars to get around, Daryl decided to drop it. Most of Triple Large employees were female. Fat man's own haram. They didn't have to deal with the bullshit. Cabs would stop for them no problem, and the other guys in the office probably took the subway. Daryl wouldn't know. He didn't socialize with them. He only hung out with other industry players on the rise. Though the price of admission to get into Lamont's inner circle was high, he was the only cat in the office who had membership other than Witchy, who'd waltz right in just because he discovered a couple of unsuccessful groups and stayed there by being the ultimate yes man. To join this hip-hop elite fraternity for over 2 years, Daryl had been a virtual indentured servant with a round-the-clock list of menial chores to do. It was not uncommon for Lamont to call Daryl at 3 o'clock in the morning to tell him his car needed a washing. And he didn't mean wash it at your earliest convenience. It was understood that when Lamont told anyone to do anything, he meant it now. But Daryl hadn't made it in, winning some respect along the way, being able to withstand the pressure. Most he thought they could hang disappeared once they found how much work was required to become part of the crew. But the menial chores and public mockery that used to rain down on him constantly were only intermittent these days. Too bad the other guys who tried to infiltrate the circle couldn't suck it up, because the end rewards were well worth it. Now Daryl was a producer of hit records. Well, so far one. If Say What, the new Ridiculous single, hit big. Guys, this guy's name is Ridiculous. It's terrible. I can't pronounce it. We just gonna call him Rad. So, well, so far, if you say what, the new Rad singles hit big. He's seen some serious cash. So why should I take the subway, Daryl wondered spitefully. And why should he have to pay out of his own pocket for using the corporate car service? He considered himself the oil in the triple large machine. The other employees were replaceable. He deserved preferential treatment. Even though he was sure he'd soon be making more money than he'd ever dreamed possible, he couldn't roll like he wanted to. Not yet. In preparation for his eventual jump in tax brackets, he had toured some pricey apartments with a real estate broker, telling the woman he was looking for something fly. That bony white bitch had held tight to her purse and kept a pinched little smile on her face the whole time, and all the other doormans at the building they visited had looked at him like he was a common thug. Or had they? Sometimes he feels like he was becoming paranoid. He had to cut down on the weed. He had noticed that Lamont would be at a party stone cold sober while everyone around him was drunk or high. And Lamont would be having so much fun as the rest of them, if not more. Fat Man had told him he tried everything once. Daryl realized he had to keep his mind right if he was going to make it to the top. But he was so out of his element rolling with Lamont, who could talk shit with other street ninjas 1 minute and take a meeting in a boardroom on Madison Avenue the next. Lamont, who'd commit fouls that no one had the guts to call during his pickup b-ball games at his Hampton spread. The head into town for favorite snack, bagels, and lox. The regular pickup players were Lamont's big money, networking pals. Some were white, some were black, and there were some Asian internet gazillionaires who looked like a college freshman and dressed like one too. They all had two things in common. None could ball, and they were all self-important dicks. They followed Lamont's cues and treated Daryl like gumsuck to the bottom of their sneakers, never inviting them to the post-game chowdowns. For the longest time, he thought it was bagels and lox, and he couldn't figure out what that meant. Then one weekend, he was sent to twice upon a bagel to pick up Lamont's lunch, and the secret of the lox was unlocked. Daryl wished he had Lamont's social status, but having grown up in a trailer drinking Kool-Aid out of old peanut butter jars, it was a difficult quality to master. When Dickie, his childhood friend turned rap star, had brought him up to New York close to 3 years ago, it was like being called up from the minors. At the time, Daryl's most treasured possession had been a 14-karat gold Mickey Mouse pendant, and he'd worn his hair in sloppy braids and made them look like Selly from The Color Purple. He thought he was fly, but Dickie, who always had an innate sense of cool, disabused him of the notion. Dickie took him shopping for all the proper hip-hop gear, throwback jerseys, fitted baseball caps, jeans and sweatsuits by Sean John, Academics, and Rockaware, and the newest kicks. Now that he had to work his way into the triple large crew, things were looking up, but not far enough. Darryl threw up the hood of his Fat Farm sweatshirt and shoved his bald fist into the front pocket, keeping Imani's package tucked firmly under one arm. He headed for the nearest subway station, cursing under his breath the whole way. Mimi walked out of the hotel and a cab stopped for her right away. "Hey, where are you going?" She turned around to find Kenny standing by the hotel entrance, sucking on a Newport in the chilly air. He just returned from having a lap dance at Stilettos in Times Square. "To meet a friend," she stammered, opening the taxi door. He squinted at her. "What friend?" Go upstairs," Mimi said without meeting his gaze. "They'll tell you. I'll be back soon." She slammed the door and the driver asked where she wanted to go. 86 Walker Street, she said, glancing towards the entrance of the hotel. Kenny snubbed out his cigarette and looked back at her. He held his hand up to his ear in a gesture that she instantly knew meant, "Did they call?" As the driver pulled off, Mimi shook her head and averted her eyes, mouthing the word no. A bead of sweat rushed down Lamont's forehead. He wriggled his nose, then picked up his pace on the treadmill, his eyes glued to the 3 flat screens hanging on the wall in front of him. The televisions were a recent installation. Lamont hated flipping back and forth between channels. He might miss something. The TVs were turned, as always, to BET, MTV, and CNN. He tried to catch Moneyline with Lou Dobbs whenever he could. Lamont's personal motto was, "If you make the dollars, it don't make sense. If it don't make the dollars, it don't make sense." The 3 screens, like his own customized stock ticker flicking with cultural currency. He pounded the conveyor belt until his Nike t-shirt was clinging to his damp, protruding belly. He cut off the treadmill, stepped down, and grabbed a bottle of Dasani from the refrigerator in the small upstairs bar. Guzzling the ice water, he snatched a fluffy white towel from the basket next to the massage table and stepped out into his terrace to cool off for a minute. Taking in the panoramic view, he savored a momentary feeling of satisfaction. This deck had more square footage than the entire apartment where he had grown up in Marcy Projects in Bed-Stuy. He looked out and spotted the Brooklyn Watchtower. He hadn't been over to the old neighborhood in a while. Not since he's convinced his father to move to an upscale retirement home in Florida. The warm weather was better for his father's chronic joint problems. Lamont Sr. called the records his son produced jump up music. Every time you see one of these videos, they're always hopping around like jumping beans. Can't none of those kids stay still. A civil servant for 39 years, Lamont Sr. would often preach, "A man can make good money, but all that money can't make him a good man." Simply saying, "I'm proud of you, son," wasn't his father's way. Lamont's beloved mother picked up the slack with the pride in her eldest son that bordered adultery. Now that Pops was living in Florida and Mama had her own luxurious condo uptown, there was no need for him to ever go back to the old hood. Manhattan was Lamont's hood now. He stepped back inside, whipped off his t-shirt, and tossed it in the laundry hamper, which could have been more accurately described as a trash can. His obsession with cleanliness, bordering on neurosis, meant he wore his gym clothes one time only. His housekeeper had orders to dispose of the clothing she found in the gym hamper. He laid down on the exercise mat and bent his legs at the knees. Time for crunches. He liked to do this part of the workout shirtless so he can keep an eye on his midsection. He had always been a bear of a man, 6 feet of solid masculine bulk, with shoulders worthy of the NFL, firm and toned. But in the last 2 or 3 years, his arms had gotten a little flabby, and his midsection had expanded to an unacceptable dimensions. He knew it wasn't solely due to an overindulgence of his wicked sweet tooth. He never had to work this hard to stay in shape in his 20s, or even in the earlier half of his 30s. He couldn't believe he was almost 40 years old. Playing basketball had always been workout enough to keep him in shape, but not anymore. He clasped his hands behind his head and strained to raise his upper body. The first one was always the hardest. He felt like quitting after 50 reps, but he soldiered on to complete the full 300, hating every damn one. He had no choice. The old man gut had to go. When the cab pulled up at the address Daryl had given her, Mimi looked in her bag for money. Daryl appeared out of nowhere and yanked the door open. "You're late." He aggressively greeted her, handing her a $10 bill to the driver. He sounded out of breath. "Sorry," she said, as Daryl hustled her past the doorman, through the lobby, and into the elevator of what looked like an expensive hotel. "Lamont don't like folks to be late," he said, fingering one of his cornrows, which had come loose at the bottom. "So is that where we're going?" Mimi wondered. To see Lamont? Daryl rushed down the carpeted hallways like a hurried traveler, desperate to make a connecting flight. Mimi glimpsed at his blotchy reddish-brown complexion and wondered if he had some kind of skin disease. He didn't say another word to her until they reached the last door on the hall. It was already ajar, so he didn't bother to knock. Before they crossed the threshold, he turned to Mimi and asked, "Ready?" That scared her. Ready for what? But she nodded, anxious to hear whatever Lamont Jackson had to say. Woo! Okay, guys. So that is chapter 3. So we are doing good. The next chapter is chapter 4, and it's called Hypnotize. All right. Let's get into it. "Monty!" Daryl bellowed into the Carvinus apartment. Getting no reply, he dashed upstairs. Mimi took a seat on the small sofa at the end of the entrance hall and removed her poncho. This apartment had stairs. She marveled to herself. A few minutes later, Daryl returned. "Go up and wait in the living room," he instructed her. "He'll be right out." Mimi had thought she was waiting in the living room. She began to head upstairs when Daryl hollered at her, "Shoes!" He pointed to the shoes lined up neatly by the front door and said, "Lamont don't like dirt." He was lucky that Lamont had been in the shower and just now hadn't caught him upstairs with his sneakers on. "And hey," Daryl said, "don't be touching him, grabbing him, or nothing, aight?" That struck Mimi as odd. Why would she want to grab Lamont? Seeing her puzzled expression, Daryl explained, "Don't be trying to shake his hand or nothing. He got a thing about germs." Mimi nodded, pulled off her scuffed boots, and then walked slowly up the stairs to the main floor of the apartment. It was massive open space, with a wall of glass along one side looking out over the city. The kitchen had not one but 2 huge gleaming refrigerators. The sheer size of the place took her breath away. She was amazed that all this was hidden inside a 6-story building on a quiet city block. It was like opening a door and expecting to see a walk-in closet, but finding a ballroom instead. At the top of the stairs, across from the kitchen, stood a long, massive dining table, made from slabs of the most beautiful wood she had ever seen. There was a spiral staircase leading yet to another floor. She wanted to go up and check it out, but Daryl had said to wait here. At the far end of the room, there were 2 huge sofas, covered in cream-colored suede. 2 impossibly large brown leather chairs, and an ebony concert grand piano, and a collection of ethnic-looking objects and tiny statues arranged on a low-glass coffee table. Everything was expensive looking, but she wasn't sure if she liked it. Nothing looked like it had ever been touched. She walked over to the fireplace to examine the array of framed photos displayed across the mantel. Lamont and Naomi Campbell, Lamont with Mariah Carey, Lamont with Latrell Sprewell, Lamont with Bill Clinton, Lamont with a white guy that she couldn't identify. They were both laughing in the shot, and the other guy's head was tilted so far back it was hard to tell who he might be. She picked it up to get a closer look. Eminem, Lamont said, walking behind her. Startled, she quickly set the picture back down in its place. This was his last album party, Lamont explained. I had just told him he should have called the album Ninjas on the Inside. She laughed because she could tell he wanted her to. But standing this close to him made her uneasy. So did being in this apartment. Have a seat, sweetheart, he said, walking to the kitchen. Pellegrino, Diet Coke, cranberry juice, Red Bull, he inquired politely, his face obscured by the heavy stainless steel refrigerator. Cranberry is good. He filled 2 huge goblets, one with orange juice, one with water, and took a seat next to her on the sofa. This place is really, she searched for the right word, big. You like it? Yeah, she said with much more enthusiasm than she felt. It's really nice. Bethany did it, he said. Bethany? He said the name of Bethany was some friend of hers. Was that his girlfriend? Bethany Oglebolt, he clarified, and took a swallow of the water. Another weight loss tip from the annoying trainer, drinking gallons of water. Right, she said, as she had no idea who he was talking about. She's an interior designer, he informed her. Does all the celebrities. Right, Mimi repeated, wondering if Lamont considered himself a celebrity. She'd never heard of him until last week. But do you really like it? He asked, looking around. He'd bought the place for $3.8 million and paid Bethany an arm and a leg to do it up right. Elegant and masculine has been his only design directives, but did it look weird? Sometimes he walked in late at night, stood in the middle of the living room, and felt like gutting the whole place. Metropolitan Home called the door electric, he said when she didn't answer. The only reason the wacky, overcharging design diva was worth her fee, in his opinion, was because Bethany Oglebolt curated apartment-generated press all on its own. Mimi had no idea that the Metropolitan Home was the name of a magazine. And did he say electric? She didn't know what he meant by that, so she just smiled. So, how old are you? He asked, moving on. Almost 21. Almost, he smiled. Most of the women he knew and some of the men were trying to shave a few years off their real ages. Only a kid as young as this one would want to round it up. I'm not going to card you. Mimi managed a smile, though every word that came out of his mouth made her feel uncomfortable. But his mouth, she decided, was the most attractive thing about his dark chocolate face. He had full, sexy lips. The rest of his face was kind of flat, like someone had smashed it in and had never bounced back. His close-cropped hair was going gray as the temples, and before he slouched down on the sofa, was this real suede? She detected a tummy jiggling under his t-shirt. So is Mimi short for something? Marie, she said. Lamont fixed his gaze on her. She was really a beauty, Compared to all the other girls in her group, she was practically a supermodel. Actually, it's Marie Jean, she began to babble. Why wasn't he saying anything? Coming here alone might have been a mistake. She thought about bringing Kenny. What a hyphen, you know? Lamont crossed his arms and began having visions of what she could be. At first, he had thought that their audition was going to be another next situation, like the 20 or so groups that he had before them. But when Mimi sang her solo verse, it was like the other two girls had disappeared. And then it came to him in a moment of divine inspiration. He didn't need a girl group. He just needed one girl, and he can mold into a pop superstar. And when he accomplished that, his Augusta job was going to be him. No one called him a one-trick pony. But everyone calls me Mimi, she continued, waiting for him to speak. But you already know that, right? So Marie Jean was my mother's name. My dad was Haitian. Lamont continued to stare. Would her hair look decent if she took out those mousy brown curls? He liked what he saw. Otherwise, the cafe au latte skin, the long legs, and yum yum, those juicy lips that had a natural rosiness. Her dark sweater, which looked like it needed a serious dry cleaning, made it hard to determine if she had anything going on the top. And her baggy pants made it hard to see what was going on from behind. She was almost 5'9", he guessed. As a connoisseur of models, he could determine a woman's height within an inch at a glance. Let your hair down, Lamont commanded. Mimi blinked several times. What? Let me see what you look like with your hair down, Lamont said with some irritation, because he didn't like to repeat himself. It wasted time. Mimi tugged the band out of her hair and shook her curls out. Okay, Lamont said neutrally, throwing his feet up at the ottoman. So, sweetheart, this group you're in, called... Before she could reply, his attention turned to something buzzing in his pocket of his gray cashmere sweats. He pulled out a cell phone, looked at the no-caller ID, and tossed it on the table. Heart song, Mimi answered brightly. Lamont smirked. Your manager come up with that? No, she said, slightly offended. I did. And you're proud of that, I could see? Well, we want to sing songs that, mean something, she said, trying to read his manner to decide what she should say next. I can do this, she told herself. Songs from the heart, she continued, as full of herself as she could manage. We don't want to be singers who just look good. We want to touch people with our music. Touch people, he said, and let out a noise that sounded like something we couldn't decide whether to sign or laugh. Honey, you can't touch people. The time he spit out the word touch as if it were a piece of lint stuck on his tongue, unless they hear your music. And people won't hear your heart songs unless they buy your record, which no one will do if they don't hear your songs playing on the radio first. And you won't get any radio play if you can't steal the programmer's attention away from the 50 other singles that come their way every week. And even if your songs are on the radio every hour, on the hour, people wouldn't be interested in laying down their hard-earned cash for your album if they aren't interested in you. So don't turn your nose up looking good, baby, because at this moment, looking good is your best asset. Though struck by his cold assessment, she managed to say, Really? I thought my voice was. Her naiveness amused him. Neck and neck, I say. He looked down and noticed a hole in the heel of her sock. Mimi noticed him noticing, his brow creasing as if he could not understand how someone could actually be walking around in the world with holy socks. He probably has socks that cost more than her boots. I think you look spectacular today, Lamont said sweetly, leaning over to pat her hand gently as she repositioned her foot to hide the offending hole. After Daryl's stern warning, she instinctively pulled her hand away at his touch. She thought he looked momentarily offended. That shit you had on yesterday was booty. Looked like something you bought on a sale at Target. No one in Toledo used the term booty, but she could tell he meant it was tired, tacky, or something along those lines. She thought so too, but Kenny had insisted. Is Jean your last name? Another phone rang and she paused, thinking he might get up to answer it. He didn't move an inch or glance away, and it stopped ringing. No, she said. My full name is Mary Jean Castellone. As she pronounced her last name, he looked like he had gotten a wind of foul odor. Damn, baby, that's a mouthful. That sounds like some mafia shit. His cell phone started vibrating on the table. Again, he looked at the call ID but did not pick up. Good, Mimi thought. Pay attention to me. He was going to offer them a deal. She could feel it. Why else would he ask her here and spend this much time? She wished he could just get to it. I like the name Mimi, he said almost to himself. But I like Mary Jean too. It's a Haitian thing. He silently considered all this as the house phone began ringing again. He looked over, idly watching 4 of the 6 lines flashing like Christmas lights. After the 3rd ring, Lamont's placid facial expression changed abruptly. Answer the mother effing phone, he roared in a tone so harsh that Mimi actually leaned away. The phone, stop ringing. Damn, I got it, Daryl shouted from downstairs later. Got 3 lines going. It's Amani. Want it? No, Lamont booms. I'll hit him back in a minute. He looked directly at Mimi in a soft voice that Daryl couldn't possibly hear and said, I'm in an important meeting. He stared at her, then broke out into a wide grin. Well, Mimi, he said, welcome to the Triple Large family. He stretched out his hand in her direction. She didn't take it. She instinctively put her hands up to her face, shaking with excitement. You mean we're signed? You want us? We, he snapped. I don't see any we here. What do you mean, she sputtered, eyes wide. I thought you called me because you didn't like Kenny, our manager. You're right, I don't like Kenny. We don't either, she stammered. Not really. But he was the only person who she knew in Toledo. She began jabbering fast and faster, and Lamont just let her go. I mean, I'm the lead. I can make decisions, and we can get rid of Kenny. I know he's an amateur. And so are your 2 little friends, Lamont said smoothly. I'm signing you, Mimi, as a solo artist. You have the voice, you have the look, you have it. They don't. Forget them. She was dumbstruck. He said closer into the sofa. She smelled sweet and clean, like a mixture of Dove soap and licorice, and he felt a stirring in his groin. Now, he commanded, as if contracts had already been signed. We have a company apartment. You'll stay there. It's completely furnished. If you want, you can move in tomorrow and send for your things. Or you can go home, get everything settled, and we can wait until next week. She looked down at her unpolished bit into the quick fingernails. She hadn't heard a thing he said after he said, forget them. Forget Toya and Keisha? How could she do that? Talk to me, he said evenly. She didn't know what to say. You want a contract, don't you? Yes, she said softly, but for the group. She looked at him pleadingly, rimming her brown eyes. I know they're your friends, honey, he said smoothly, but they aren't as talented as you. It might sound harsh, but this is the harshness of business. If you want to do this, I can see that you do. You have to recognize that. Mimi inhaled sharply. She felt like he could see her heart beating. He was right. She did have the best voice. They all knew that, but that's why she was the lead. Doing this without Toya and Keisha had never entered her mind. They were a group. Sensing he was making headway, Lamont pulled out the line that worked like a charm. With every woman he's ever wanted to get into bed. You're special, he cooed, pausing to let the words take effect. Talented and beautiful. She was flattered, but she heard herself saying, I can't. The words sounded lame even to her. She couldn't even imagine going solo. It would be like shutting her security blanket, and she was not ready to do that. And Toya and Keisha would be devastated. She couldn't do it. She wouldn't. What a shame, Lamont said, his friendly tone cooling. She would come around, but he didn't have all day to play guidance counselor for this child. He had a massage scheduled for 6. They're my best friends, she said, flushing with anger. If he was so tough, why couldn't he tell Toya and Keisha to their faces that he didn't want them? Lamont wanted to tell her how many times the supposed best friend of some girl he was effing tried to give him some PUSSY on the slide. And that chunky girl with the braids, Laquifa, or whatever, she had hoe written all over her. He was quite certain that she had been called for a meeting here today. She would have sucked his DICK and swallowed if she thought it would earn her for a solo deal. He received oral favors for less. I know for a fact, he said sharply, that either of those girls were here in your place right now, they would jump on this chance and never look back. Mimi smirked. He knew that for a fact? Did he? Toya and Keisha would never dump me to take a solo deal. Would they? But it's just that. Mimi began, unsure of what she wanted to say. Lamont looked at her. He knew she'd been thanking him later for advising her to drop the dead weight. Right now, however, he had an overwhelming urge to strangle her. Was she really so naive as to throw away a solo deal in order to spare the feelings of two no talents just because they all jumped double dutch together? And what do I say when they find out I got a deal without them? She said as defiantly as she could. Without her, there was no group. How could she ever face them? Hey, that's on you, he said. Maybe they could do backup vocals. He stood up. Mimi remained seated. Her jaw firmly set. You're not going to get a deal somewhere else, he said, sensing she might try to come up with alternatives to his proposal. Not with those 2 other girls hanging around your neck like cement blocks. He loomed over her, speaking with a stinging finality. Maybe that fake-ass manager told you different, but I'm telling you the truth. Mimi knew his assessment of Kenny's managerial skills was dead on. Kenny didn't have much juice. Does he have other record labels interested, Lamont asked. 100% sure that fake-ass manager did not. I'm not sure, she said, her eyes darting nervously around the room. He might. He doesn't, Lamont snapped. Truth is, I could put 2 girls at random off the street who look as good as those 2 others, and they probably sound better. Mimi shot at him with a wounded glare on behalf of her girls. God, he was awful. How could he talk like that about Keisha and Toya? They were cute enough, and their voices were good, if not great. Lamont stood over her, wondering if this girl was ever going to come around. The meeting was over. He helped her up, wordlessly leading her down the stairs, where Darryl was manning the phones. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 3 minutes past 6. Where was his masseuse? I have to think about it, Mimi said shakily. This couldn't be happening. Not this way. It was supposed to be all 3 of them together. Great, Lamont said easily. You'll have till tomorrow. He stepped close enough to speak to her without Darryl overhearing. Mimi, listen to me, he murmured. He put both of his hands on her cheeks and stooped a little to look directly into her eyes. Toledo is no place for a girl like you. You're golden, honey, and you don't even know it. This is the way it has to be. Trust me." He kissed her on the forehead. "I'm a star maker, baby," he said with a huge grin. "And believe me, you going to be a star." Corniest line in the world, but that was the kind of Hollywood movie bullshit that he knew she wanted to hear. "Hey, congrats," Daryl called out, hurrying down the hallway after Mimi got her bag on her shoulder and her poncho and boots in her arms. She had forgotten everything, wandering out the hall like a sleepwalker. "You can call me Daryl, but my peeps just call me Country D, 'cause I'm from down south," he said. The elevator doors opened, and she seemed to float inside. "Mimi, that's a hot name," he continued following her. "I groom acts, so I got a big say when it comes to details like that. Names and shit. I produce too." Mimi did not respond. Daryl was beginning to think that she was deliberately ignoring him. She had plenty to say to Lamont, the big boss man, but she couldn't say anything to him. The minute you get a deal, you turn into a diva, huh? Who listened to her group's crude demo? Him. Who'd brought it to Lamont's attention? Country D. If it wasn't for him, she wouldn't even be here. Arriving downstairs, she hurried out of the elevator, but the coolness of the lobby tiles startled her back into reality. She turned around as Daryl dropped her boots, bags, and ponchos on the elevator floor. Daryl strode through the lobby, thinking, if this uppity chick thinks I'm going to play houseboy to her Cinderella, she out of control. He walked to Lamont's Suburban with the 3 large license plate, which was idling by the curb. After pulling on her boots in the lobby, Mimi followed. "Yo, shoot her up to Chesterfield on 37th, Daryl said, rousing from his cap nap. "And be back by 8 to get Monty for dinner." "The Chesterfield," Carlos muttered. "Where's that?" "On 37th, ninja." Daryl was simmering. Lamont never let him floss around town in his whip. "I'll call you tomorrow to touch base," Daryl said gruffly, and turned his head back to the building, leaving Mimi to struggle with the door. Daryl knew Carlos, a quiet man with menacing eyes, never performed any official chauffeur duties. He was just a 36-year-old boy on parole whose full-time job was safely shuttling Lamont around town. Mimi slid onto the seat, a grim look on her pretty face. The back windows were half open, and the crisp air felt good. Raising her pouty lips up to the opening window, she called out, "Country D!" Oh, the princess has something to say. At least she had addressed him correctly. He'd come up with the nickname Country D a few months ago, but it didn't seem to be catching in the office. "Yeah," he huffed, hoping she wasn't going to hit him from some cash. Money matters had to go through Lamont. "Thank you," she said quietly. "No worries, baby." Daryl managed to say nonchalantly through, though he was caught off guard by the genuineness of her tone. "Thank you." No one he worked with had ever said that to him, unless they were being sarcastic. The Suburban took off, and Mimi settled back, thrilled and panicked. Toya's words spinning in her head. Maybe we're going to get signed. Maybe we're going to move here. And maybe we're going to be famous. Maybe. But how could she tell them that as far as Lamont was concerned, there was no more we? Okay, guys. That is the end of chapter 4. And so far, so good. These chapters are long. So we are going to do this last final chapter. And this is going to be chapter 5. We may be able to do 5 and 6, like said. So let's get to it. Lamont's driver hadn't said anything to her. He was chatting on his hands-free cell phone the whole time. The drive back to the hotel gave her time to consider her options. Option number 1, tell the truth. Lamont thinks that you have no talent and I should go solo and forget you. Not really an option at all. Option number 2, focus on the positive. Lamont wants to give me a solo deal, but he wants you guys to sing backup. Isn't that great? Toya might go for it, but she could hear Keisha's voice already, and it was saying, I ain't no backup singer. Option number 3, put the decision into the hands of Lamont. Put the decisions into their hands. Lamont wants to give me a solo deal, but it's on you. If you think I should do it, we'll stick together and try to get a deal as a group. If Kenny got us one audition, he can get us another. A possibility. Except for the fact that their trip to New York had made it clear Kenny needed to be subtracted from the equation. When she walked back into the hotel room, she still hadn't decided what to say. Keisha was curled up in one of the double beds. Toya was staring mindlessly at the television, and Kenny was in the room, bent over the phone like he was praying into it. No call yet, Toya said, managing to simultaneously glum and optimistic. Mimi signed, trying to sound disappointed. How was your date, Keisha said. It wasn't a date, Mimi replied. Was he cute, Toya said. No, Mimi answered, picturing Lamont. She had to tell them. She went into the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror as she quietly rehearsed options 2 and 3. But Kenny was still around, so she'd have to wait. By the time they got into the airport the next day, she realized there was a 4th option, saying nothing, going home and starting over. If Lamont wanted her, another record label would too. And Keisha and Toya did have good voices. They were a group, and that's what they would continue to be. 2 nights later, Lamont was sprawled out in what was some considered to be the choicest piece of real estate in all of downtown Manhattan, the center banquet at Swirl. The booth was big enough to hold 7 people comfortably, but the way Lamont and his cohort spread out, there was only room for 4. The center banquet was the perfect vantage point from which to see the entire lounge, and more important, from which to be seen. The crowd was strictly A-list, well-known actors, models, and cool media types who looked like models. Lamont had invested a small amount of money in the place because he had gotten to know the owner, Gustav, when Gustav had managed Cognac, a hotspot, a few years back. Even though Lamont's money investment was negligible, people would say, "Hey Monty, let's go to your club," as if he had poured his life savings into the place and built it from the ground up with his own power tools. Tuesday was hip-hop night, so there was more color to the room than usual. When Lamont and crew showed up for a late dinner, the prime table was waiting for them. "What's up, my ninjas?" squawked Nate Gibbs, Lamont's lawyer and closest friend, as he joined Daryl, Lamont, and Witchy in the booth. "My ninjas and Witchy," Nate jokingly amended his salutation. Witchy was a well-liked member of the crew because he had mastered the art of race mixing. He got Sorry guys, getting back. My other phone started ringing. Okay, where were we? Witchy was a well-liked member of the crew because he mastered the art of race mixing. He got all the inside jokes he could play. the dozens with the best of them. He appreciated black women. He dated plenty of them. And when talk turned to racial politics, he could add his own insightful but never condescending 2 cents. Even though he was a highly successful record executive in New York, Witchy was, in an almost literal sense, the black sheep of his family. The rest of them had shortened their surname, Mankiewicz, to the more ethnically ambiguous Man. His venture capitalist father was a staunch Republican. His mother was a society matron, but with Lamont and crew, Witchy was accepted and respected most of the time. He never mentioned his family or the fact he'd been raised in Marin County, one of the richest, whitest enclaves in America. All anyone knew was his oft-told story that listening to Public Enemy's "It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back" in 1988 had forever changed his life and incited him to fight the power. At least in a way that was lucrative enough for him to purchase a loft in Soho. Nate, a 40-year-old fair-skinned brother with gray eyes and a bald spot on the top of his forehead that Lamont frequently advised him to treat with Rogaine, sat next to Witchy. He nodded at Daryl, who lookingly as sullen as usual. "That's a fly sweatshirt, Daryl. Rockaware does infant sizes." "It's a men's small, mother effer," Daryl snapped. "But when I copped it, I ran into your girls coming out of the boys' department with jock straps for you." Nate looked at him blankly. No one bothered to respond. Lamont's eyes ping-ponged around the room. He waved at a raven-haired actress chilling in another booth. She was one of the stars of the hit show on HBO. He'd never seen the show and couldn't recall her name, but she was somebody, so she merited a wave. "So your search for a new act finally bore fruit," Nate said. He was already reading Mimi's contract. "About time." "Yes, Daryl's discovery," Lamont said, more to make a point for Witchy than to give Daryl any props. Normally, Daryl would have taken this opportunity to toot his own horn loudly, but tonight he was uncharacteristically quiet, acknowledging the remark with a sniff nod. "Mimi, our Haitian mommy," Lamont said. "She'll be back in town in a couple of days. We can sign the papers then." "What does she look like?" Nate asked. "She's hot?" "At this point, more like lukewarm," Lamont said. "She needs some work, but she has the potential to be a real looker." "We'll get her all shaped up," Witchy said confidently. Daryl tapped away at his two-way pager, adding nothing to the hot or not evaluation. "Travis," Lamont cried when he spotted Travis Peters, the author of the most widely read gossip column in the city. "Travis!" "Hey, fellas," Travis said as he approached the table. "Have I got scoop for you," Lamont said, as excited as he were about to hand the scandal hound-colored photos of Tom Cruise tongue-kissing another man. "I just signed a new artist, Mimi Jean. Amazing voice and hot. A real looker." "A female rapper?" Travis asked, with slight interest. "No," Lamont corrected. "A singer. She's not hip-hop. She's not hip-hop. She's hip-hop." Lamont noticed Travis wasn't writing. "You getting this?" Travis started scribbling in his notebook. "A singer. Great," he said. "Maybe I could run a little something about her. She pop meet R&B, but with a real hip-hop edge," Lamont continued. "Sort of like J-Lo." He didn't like the way that sounded and immediately added, "But she could really sing." "Great," Travis said, scribbling. "And you know, being down with TLE, I mean, there's no better place for her to be. She has instantly credibility in the hip-hop world." Lamont went on for another 20 minutes, big-upping himself and his label and managing to work in the impressive sale figures of all his artists. He did this pitch so often, it was like he had a press release on CD-ROM in his head, and all he had to do was hit play and open his mouth. Travis stopped taking notes 15 minutes into Lamont's PR spiel. Great, he finally said. For a writer, Travis said the same thing a lot. So what day is Mimi coming back? Lamont questioned Daryl as soon as Travis had ambled away. The music was getting louder, and Daryl had his own nose buried in his two-way. To get his attention, Lamont dipped his fingers into Daryl's water glass and flicked a spray of drops into Daryl's face. Daryl looked up angrily, wiped his face, then snapped his pager shut. He was used to Lamont's childish ways. 1 minute, Lamont would be barking out orders, and the next cackling and spilling around in his $2,000 office chair like a kid at an amusement park. And Daryl knew all about the secret stash of candy bars in Fat Man's plush office. I asked you what day Mimi's coming back. I want her to sing the hook on that song with Fat E for the soundtrack. We need to get going on that. I don't know. Maybe Wednesday or maybe never, Daryl thought. Mimi had called him yesterday morning before he had a chance to call her. Their conversation was brief. I'm at the airport. Your flight ain't until 2. We're taking an earlier one. So you're going home to get your stuff together? Cool. No, I'm going home. Yeah, what day you want to come back? I can't take the deal. What? I can't take the deal. Not solo. What? I'm going home. I'm not coming back. Are you high? Thanks, though. Then she hung up. Mimi slipped into the booth at Winky's Diner in Toledo and announced, let's move to Atlanta. Toya looked up from the menu. Excuse me? I've been thinking about it, Mimi said. Let's move to Atlanta. Move to Atlanta and do what? Keisha said. Get a new manager first off, Mimi said, closing Toya's menu in order to have her undivided attention. They ate here 3 times a week, and Toya always ordered the same thing. Then get a record deal and get a new life. Mimi's mother, Angela, came over to take their orders. She gave Mimi a peck on the cheek. Usual, ladies? Yeah, Toya said. Bacon cheeseburger deluxe. Make that 2, Keisha said. Make that 3, Mimi chimed in. But hold on the bacon. No swine for me. We don't know anyone in Atlanta, Toya pointed out as soon as Angela had left. And why Atlanta, Keisha said. There's more of a music scene there, Mimi said. We can meet people. And the same jobs we have here, we can have there. Keisha doesn't have a job, Toya said. But unlike you two, Keisha volleyed back, I got a man, and I'm not leaving him. No, he'll probably be leaving you when he goes to jail, Mimi sniped. Don't hate 'cause you lonely, Keisha responded. I'll stay lonely before I get caught up with a drug dealer, Mimi retorted, while Tanya nodded and uh-huh. He's getting out of that, Keisha murmured. Mimi and Toya both had the same thought. That's what they all say. And what about you, Keisha said. Moving to Atlanta would put you closer to your man. That idea hadn't even occurred to Mimi. Who, Jamal? Yeah, Jamal, Keisha said. You've only had one man in your life. He's my ex-man. Well, he's at Georgia State. You want me to leave my man while you're trying to get back with yours? Since Mr. Football Star had dumped her, Mimi hardly thought about him anymore. The last time she came across a picture of him and her together, taken during the happy days, she only thought about how much she couldn't stand him now. Then she'd burn the picture like she'd done all the others. I'm not, Mimi said persuasively. Not at all. I'm over that jackass. Toya and Keisha exchanged skeptical glances, and then it was cheeseburgers all around. Okay, guys. That is chapter 5. So we are going to be hitting on chapter 6. And that's where we will be ending. So chapter 6 is called Heat. Let's get to it. Let me drink some water. Because these chapters are long. Okay. Just really quickly, I still don't have no ideas about who these girls were. At first, I'm like, could this be total? Could this be total? I don't know, right? We will see. Chapter 6. Heat. It was a little after 7 in the evening, and Lamont was padding around his office in silk boxers and stocking feet. 2 dark sweets were draped across the sofa. He just showered, applied deodorant, shaved, slapped on some cologne. The private bathroom, tucked inside his expensive office, was a must. With so many social functions to attend in the evenings, it was a hassle to go all the way home to change. And he had to get clean before he got clean, but he didn't want to feel funky underneath one of his impeccable Italian suits. Whenever he found something truly sharp, he'd buy 2 of it. Suits, shirts, ties, shoes, cufflinks. One for home, one for the office. His ex, Kenya, used to cluck. "You spend more time getting dressed than any woman I know," he'd tell her. Imagine, it's everything, baby. If you spend more time cultivating your own, maybe you'll be a working actress. Reaching for a wood hanger, he held up an Armani to the light. So gray it was almost black. Maybe with a silver tie. No, it almost looked like a tux. And this event wasn't black tie. The Armani would be trying too hard. The navy Zegna would be better. Just as he was pulling up his pants, Imani burst in. A pretty, earthy sister who sported long, neat dreads. Imani Spears was the one person he truly could not live without. Theirs was the longest drama-free relationship he's ever had with a woman other than his mother. 7 years ago, she had arrived to the interview for the job of a receptionist, dressed to repress, wearing a knee-length black skirt, a white button-up shirt, and sensible loafers. Lamont hired her on the spot. She was a middle-class chick who liked hip-hop, and Lamont didn't want some ghetto bitch answering the phones while snapping gum and being rude to people, which was what got the first receptionist fired. Imani quickly proved to be invaluable. She showed up early every day, stayed late without complaint, and manned the phones. Made sure Lamont's itinerary was taken care of. And though she was a tiny little thing, verbally checked any of the rappers who rolled in acting like a fool. Within a year, she was allowed to hire another receptionist, and she became Lamont's exclusive personal assistant. No one else was allowed to ask Imani to do anything for them. She belonged to Lamont. Lamont's assistant now had an assistant of her own, 21 years old, eager to please Vicky, who was not allowed to address Lamont directly, and who stayed in her cubicle in the deep recess of the office until summoned. Lamont was not embarrassed to be caught by Imani hopping around half-dressed with his hairy barrel chest on display. Neither was Imani. She'd seen it all many times before. Anyway, there was a crisis brewing. She urgently picked up the phone at Lamont's coffee table and held it in the direction. "Darryl," she informed him, taking the call off hold. "He's in jail." "What'd you do?" Lamont growled, accusingly, holding the receiver with his shoulder as he zipped up his trousers. "I didn't do shit," Darryl said defensively. Lamont knew it was a lie. He put the phone on speaker and continued to dress. Slipping into his white YSL shirt, Imani picked up the lavender silk tie from the sofa, and Lamont stood in front of her. He could never make a perfect knot like she could. "We got into a fight on 125th, Darryl related, breathing restlessly. "We was coming out of Sylvia's and we—" "Who is we?" Lamont interrupted. "Me and Dickie." Imani paused it in adjusting the knot, and she looked up at Lamont. They both exhaled heavily. Darryl getting locked up was a minor annoyance, but one of the label stars who had a newly released album riding high on the charts was a real issue, or a serious problem, depending on the charge. How the F did you let Dickie get locked up? Lamont snapped. Imani knew exactly what her boss was thinking. Dickie had major press scheduled for this week. He's taping 106. He's taping at 106 in Park tomorrow, she reminded him. He's got BET tomorrow, snapped at the speakerphone. How'd you let this happen? Let it, Daryl cried. I was trying to break the shit up. We saw this cat on Lennox selling bootlegs of Dickie's album. Dickie started stomping the CDs and shit, and they got into it. I was trying to pull him off. Next thing I know, pop, got us both clinked up. One of them pigs knocked me on the head. They won't give me no medical attention or nothing. I'ma sue. Now that Lamont had the details, he felt relieved. This dust-up would make the papers for sure. Whenever one of his artists got into a scrape with the law, he'd say, is it going to sell records? If so, he didn't see a problem, as long as they didn't kill anybody. This was just a harmless fistfight. Anything wrong with the little old-fashioned man-to-man combat? Not in his book. And Rad's image was getting a bit too clownish. This would make it known that despite his fun-loving demeanor, he was no punk. Where's Dickie? Lamont said, unconcerned about any lumps that might be forming on Daryl's head. They got him in some type of special holding cell, Daryl griped. Even in jail, they got VIP. Amadi noticed 2 lines reading. She went to pick up the other phone on Lamont's desk. The what? Lamont snapped, recognizing Daryl's nervous stutter as a sign of real trouble. Spit it out. That ain't all, Daryl spat. I had a heater on me. They got me on that. What? Lamont raged. What the F you carrying a gun for? Protection. From who? Lamont snarled. The Dwarf Patrol. It's Dickie, Imani said, holding the other phone. Lamont hung up on Daryl and took the other phone from Imani. I heard what happened, yo. Don't worry. The MFer was stealing from you. From us. Taking food out of our mouths. He deserves to get his ass beat. Imani's on her way. Admit to nothing. Lamont handed the phone back to Imani and finished dressing. He pulled up the drawer that held his shoes. He selected the black lace-up short boots from Bruno Magli. O.J. Charnist, a perfectly good brand, he thought as he laced them up. By the time he threw on his cashmere overcoat, Imani had gotten herself ready to leave and walk with him to the elevator. There was no need to discuss the bail arrangements. Imani knew the routine. Grimy has been arrested twice for marijuana possession and for carrying an unlicensed gun. Floss had been locked up for driving under the influence with a suspended license. She already placed a call to the criminal defense attorney the label had on retainer, and he was meeting her at the precinct. Night, sweetheart, Lamont said, strolling to his waiting car. Call me if you need me. Don't worry, Imani said, always agreeable, even when heading out for a long night at Central Booking. I won't. Lamont arrived at the Peace Games benefit just in time to have his picture taken on the red carpet with Irv Green. One of Irv's pet charities, the organization funded workshops for public school children on how to handle conflict without resorting to violence. Lamont straightened his tie, then stepped between Irv and some really hot actress, on whose very low back he smoothly placed his hand and smiled wide for the cameras. Mimi sat at the kitchen table and decided to test the waters. I'm thinking of moving to Atlanta. Angela Castellone, a haggard woman of 38 who looked 10 years older, turned her tired brown eyes away from the coffee pot. By yourself? She said nervously. No, Mimi said, with Keisha and Toya. It was going to take me some convincing, but she was confident she could wear them down. What about Kenny? If we keep waiting on Kenny to do something for us, we'll be waiting for the rest of our lives. He got you that audition in New York, Angela pointed out, gulping her 9th cup of coffee for the day. And they haven't called us back, Mimi said, anxious to change the subject. She was starting to feel like a complete imbecile for turning down the deal. Even since she's returned from New York, she couldn't stop imagining what it would be like to be solo. She never allowed herself to dream that big. For so long, she's been dealing with other people's attitudes. You think you too cute? you think you white or you think you hot shit just because you could sing. That downplaying her natural assets had become second nature, a defense mechanism almost. So she never thought about being on her own. That was selfish. That was for a girl who thought too much of herself. And being out there on stage alone without her girls on either side was bone chilling. But Lamont believed in her. Lamont said that she had it. I do. Lamont wanted to make her a star. He did, and Lamont knew what he was talking about. He was no Kenny. Kenny is full of promises he can't keep, Mimi stated firmly. There's nothing for me here. I'm here, Angela said, pointing out. Mimi walked to the refrigerator to escape her mother's sad puppy dog eyes. If Angela could have pursued her own dreams of becoming a singer, maybe neither of them would be here. But when Angela got knocked up and found herself abandoned by Mimi's father, she settled into a life of just scraping by, surviving instead of thriving. Well, you'll still have Jerry, Mimi called out sarcastically. Jerry Morelli, Angela's current squeeze-turned-permanent fixture, was a squat, hairy Italian with greasy hair and a lecturous stare. Every time he laughed, he, it sounded like he just remembered a dirty joke. Leave Jerry out of this, Angela said, quick to protect the first man she'd ever been able to hold on to. With a pint of ice cream in hand, Mimi went over to the couch, flicked on the TV, and sulked. Angela had a blind spot when it came to men. After years of romantic disasters, Mimi wondered why her mother still couldn't see her worth. The men who had come into her life over the years were no better than Mimi's deadbeat dad. Black, white, Latin, Angela had an equal opportunity knack for attracting losers. They ranged from bad to worse, each subpar in his own unique way. One was married, a fact Angela had figured out, even though she was never allowed to call him at home until his wife had called Angela looking for him. Another guy had punched her so hard he had broken her eye socket, and then Angela had apologized for making him mad. Sometimes Mimi played surrogate boyfriend, buying her mother a Hallmark card on flowers on Valentine's Day when she knew no one else would. Sometimes she was a best friend, listening to Angela prat on like a lovesick teenager about some worthless guy, and then consoling Angela when he didn't call. After the phone got turned off one too many times, Mimi started taking care of the bills and put her mother on a strict budget. Because she was tired of being her mother's mother, she had her own life to live. Let Jerry take care of Angela. He was another dud, but at least he hasn't gotten physically abusive. When Mimi had caught him reading her diary once, he calmly shut it, as if he'd been leisurely enjoying a good novel. A singer, he laughed. Keep dreaming, kiddo. Angela thought he was charming. Mimi thought he was a world-class perv. Right on cue, they heard a key unlocking at the front door. Jerry had recently moved in. One more reason Mimi had a burning desire to move out. And here he is, Mimi said quietly as the creaking door swung open. Your Prince Charming. Okay, guys, that is officially chapter 6. We are now on chapter 7, and we will save that for tomorrow. So officially, we have read chapters 1 through 6. I have done 1 through 3 in another video, and I have created a book club. Shout out to all you guys who said that I should create a book club. Thank you so much. I'm really excited about it. So if you go on my channel, you can see the book club. It is titled After Hours, and it's going to house all the books we're doing in chapters. So you guys can just read along. If you guys didn't catch 1, 2, 3, you can definitely catch 1 through 3 on the book club on my profile. Again, it's called After Hours. This book, let's see how many chapters this book is. This book has 58 chapters, and we are going to be on chapter 7. So we have quite a while. For everybody who has subscribed, wrote comments, I love y'all. Bear with me. Reading is a job. Sometimes you stumble over words. Sometimes your accent gets involved. So please bear with me. There was a couple of people in the comments that was like, girl, you saying axe and you saying act. Listen, at the end of the day, I got a New York accent. I'm a New York girl from Hell's Kitchen. You gonna hear it, okay? But nonetheless, I appreciate y'all. Thank you for watching. Please comment, like, subscribe. Give me some love because reading these chapters are long and I appreciate it. Love y'all and be checking out all my videos. We got more to come. All right.
Mama, it's cocktail hour, so rock 'em up. Oh, mama, it's cocktail hour, so pour it up. Pour it up.